Hello world, this is Lisa Friedrichsen, your friend and computer science professor with another short screencast about Access. And this time I thought it would be good to step back and talk about getting the data into the database. Certainly at some point you're going to want to create forms so that users can enter individual records or edit records already in the database. But if you're wanting to import a large set of existing data into the database, how do you do that? Well, Access has made that very easy with this external data tab, because there are a number of different file formats from which you can import data. And there are wizards associated with each of these options to help walk you through that process. However, by far the most common is probably to import data from Excel. Before we do that, I want to take you to an Excel spreadsheet. Now, Excel has gotten to be a very large container. You can thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of records in a single Excel worksheet. And the reason I like to use Excel so much is because it's just so easy to see the data and prepare the data before you import it. You want to make sure your data is as clean as possible before you try and do that import process, and then the import process is much more likely to be successful. So when I open my data in Excel, I'm looking for a couple of things. I'm looking for one big tight list. And by a tight list, I mean we cannot have blank columns or rows. So often you'll see a blank row here between the field names and the actual records. Let's go ahead and delete that. For all of the list management features in Excel, as well as for importing purposes in Access, you want to have a tight list. Now, if you have blanks in your list at different places, that's absolutely fine. But you cannot have a completely blank row nor a completely blank column. That will break the list at that edge. You also don't want to have subtotals. So if you have any subtotals here, count or subtotal your data, you want to either delete them or push them down with some blank rows. Once you have a nice tight list, you want to go through it and make sure that A, B, C, D, E, oh, look, we're jumping from E to G. You want to make sure that you don't have any hidden columns or rows. And let's try and unhide F, and we've got a higher date. And sometimes I'll even come down here and highlight the rows below my list. Now I realize this is a tiny little list, but I'm still going to demonstrate it, and right click and delete just to make sure that those rows that follow the last record in my list are blank. And I come over here and do that same thing with the columns, because if you've worked with Excel before, you know that sometimes a cell can contain a space or a piece of formatting or something that's invisible to the naked eye, but will appear as data when you attempt to import it into Access. I've got a nice clean list. I've deleted the columns to the right. I've deleted the rows below it, so I know that we've got clean margins and a nice clean edges to our list. And then what I like to do is go through each column and sort it A to Z and Z to A. Just because oftentimes when you sort A to Z and Z to A, it's outliers or weird characters at the top or the bottom of the list. And when I sort this in A to Z, I get Cartwright and Lopez before Barker and Davidson. What's up with that? And what's up with that is because I've got an inadvertent space for that first character. So sorting every single column A to Z and Z to A, you can check to see if sorting is happening in the way that you would expect it to happen. I found that sorting every column A to Z and Z to A helps put the junk or the special characters or the spaces before the entries at the top of the list, and helps me clean up my data before I ever get into Access. Dates are particularly difficult, and you're going to want to be very careful with your date columns, because watch what happens when I sort these dates. 2020, 2021, 2020, 2015, 2015, something's wrong. And what's happened is that very first date sure looks okay at a glance, but when I examine it after sorting, I can see that January does not have 32 days in it. That's a bogus date. That would create an error inside of Access. It's supposed to be January 31st, and then sort A to Z, Z to A again, and see if, yes, now these dates seem to be sorting correctly. So be especially careful of dates. They can look correct in Excel, which allows a lot of different information in a column, but can cause errors when imported into Access, which will demand, if it's a date time field, will demand that all the dates be actual dates and not just look like dates. And the way Access handles bogus dates is either by stopping the import altogether, not importing that record, or sometimes it will simply delete that piece of data but import the rest of the record, and you'll get an errors table that will help you pick through that. But the point here is that you want to avoid any import errors if possible by spending some time with your data and finding those leading spaces and finding those special characters and fixing them, doing the best you can to scrub your data in Excel before you bring it into Access, which is stricter about how it stores data in each field, because each field has a data type in Access. In Excel, as you know, you can put any data in any column. I'm ready to save and close that Excel file, and I'm ready to import it into Access. Now, eventually, I want those employees to be in my employees table. And when we import data from Excel or any file, you will be given the chance to just import it into a new table or to append it to an existing table, or just to link out. And link out means you're just going to use that data in the database, but it's actually going to stay stored in Excel. Linking only works if the path to that Excel spreadsheet is very stable. And the path consists of both the server, the folder structure, as well as the file name. Importing versus appending, I always import my data and then append it later versus trying to do those two steps in one process. Let's go ahead and import that data into Access and watch this wizard help us. It's reading my data here already. I can see my information. The first row does contain my column headings. Those will become your field names in your new table. Next, you can even go through each of these fields and identify the data type if you want. Short text, of course, for the first four. First date. See how this wizard is reading that these are dates? So that's correct. These are supposed to be dates. And the address then again is text, city is text, region is text, and even home phone is text. Okay, next. It's asking me if it wants to add a primary key field or choose an existing field. I'll go ahead and let Access add a primary key field, and then I can make sure that the number of records that I had in my Excel spreadsheet are the number of records that I've imported into my Access database. Next, and now it's asking me what table name, and I'm just going to call this employee import. Finish. Now, here's a good question. You can either save these import steps or not. If you save the import steps, I'm just going to go ahead and save it with this default name. Then in my Saved Imports button, see, I've got that set of instructions. So if you're importing products or sales or inventory into the database every Monday morning, you could just run this saved import versus going through those steps that you saw in the wizard. So now I have my employee import table, and I've got 9 records. I can see that I've got 9 records in the bottom. And I've also got that auto number ID field that Access added on the import process. All of my fields are short text except for the birth date and the hire date became date time. So all that looks good. I did not get a paste errors table. So that means that all of my records imported cleanly. It did not have any errors. So now if I wanted to combine these two tables, I would go to a query, and this is where some of these other queries really help. The append query. And the append query type allows me to append the records in the field list at the top into the table I choose. I'm going to append the employees import table into the employees table, and I want to import all of these fields except for ID. I don't need that. When we're working with an append query, we get this new row, the append to row in the query grid, and we can match up these field names. Last space name field in my employees import table goes into last name and first name. I can line up the field names of my imported records with the field names of the employees table that I'm trying to append to. Birth date goes to birth date, hire date goes to hire date, and home space phone goes to home phone. And if I want to view those records, I simply click my datasheet view button, and here are the records that I'm about to append. Remember that that datasheet view button is always a safe play. It always shows you what records you've selected for the next process. In an append query or any of these queries with an exclamation point on them, you're going to first select records and look at them with the view button, and then you're going to run the query, which is actually going to do the action. It's going to make the table, append the records, update the records, or delete the records, depending upon which of these action queries you've selected. In this case, we're about to append 9 rows. That's what we're expecting. I'm going to go ahead and click yes, and then I'm going to close this query. I can save it or not save it. Oftentimes after you've done an append, you don't need to save it because it may be a one-time operation, but I'm going to go ahead and say yes and call this append employees, and we'll look at that then in the navigation window here. But first let's look at the employees table, and now I have those 9 new records here added to my employees table. So records 20 through 28, those 9 records are now my new employees, and they got an automatic employee ID auto number based on the records that have been imported and deleted into this table. At this point in time, I could delete my employees import table because those records are successfully stored in the employees table. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then let's look at our queries, and I just want you to see the icon that's on the append employees query, which we just created. Notice that it's got an exclamation point. That means if you double click it, you're going to be running that query again. We don't want to do that. So be careful with any query that has an exclamation point on it, because given I don't need that anymore, I'm going to also delete that query. Importing data into your database. Try to use Excel as much as possible because it's really easy to see your data, work with your data, and sort your data. It's very easy to scrub it before it enters your Access database. And then you can use the tools inside of Access to append that data to the correct table as needed and line up those field names. Thank you.